Hello and welcome to Undivided. I'm Brandi Kruse. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your continuing commitment to give common sense a comeback. Happy Monday to all of you. A special happy Monday to Undivided subscribers who help us to do the show, help me do the show full time. So if you enjoy Undivided and you want to help contribute to this movement and this mission, you can become a subscriber for as little as $5 a month on Patreon at patreon.com/undivided. Or by becoming a contributor on my locals community, brandikruse.locals.com. Coming up today, a huge indicator that, as we've been saying, the current issue of homelessness on our streets is actually a drug crisis. There was a bust by the Seattle Police Department. It was actually kind of a bust they fell into that perfectly illustrates this point, and also is one of the big reasons why the governor's $4 billion plan to solve homelessness through more housing isn't going to do anything. Also coming up today, I'm going to go into, pretty hard detail. I mean, it's going to be hard to listen to is what I mean by that, about efforts from community members in a couple cities in Washington state to push back against the housing of sexually violent predators in less than secure facilities in their neighborhoods. And specifically, I'm going to go into some pretty graphic detail about what one of these sex offenders is accused of and why there is no common sense public safety rehabilitation rationale for taking these sex offenders off a secure island and moving them, I don't know, a few yards away from a bus stop where kids congregate. So we're going to go through that. Also, legislative cutoff, a critical legislative cutoff is coming up in Olympia on Friday. So we're going to go through some bills that either need to move this week or they're going to die. And this is really our last chance to try to get lawmakers who are holding out on some of these public safety priorities to jump on board. But first, man, I got to talk about, my favorite subject is aliens. I don't know. We've talked about aliens a few times. I was telling folks the other day that I am totally on board with the ancient alien theory, which I know, I'm sure some of you are going to be like, wow, Brandi's a conspiracist. But there's just, have you ever watched Ancient Aliens? There is some stuff in there that really makes you think. Anyway, more objects shot down over North America. Of course, there was the Chinese spy balloon. And then there were also objects shot down since then over Alaska, Canada, Michigan, like Huron specifically. And what's really interesting is the description of them is kind of vague. And you have the government and the White House saying, oh, we don't really know what they were, and we're looking for the debris to try to get a good handle on it. To which I think you're really telling me we don't have the technology to have tracked these things in, know where they came from, know what they were. And you're telling me the U.S. would shoot something down that it didn't know what it was. I just don't believe that. And also, Karine Jean-Pierre. So I'll play this for you.
I know there have been questions and concerns about this, but there is no indication of aliens or extraterrestrial activity with these recent takedowns. Again, there is no indication of aliens or terrestrial activity with these recent takedowns. Wanted to make sure that the American people knew that, all of you knew that, and it was important for us to say that from here because we've been hearing a lot about it. I'm not.
Would you tell us?
I'm just, I loved E.T., the movie, but I'm just going to leave it there.
I mean, if Karine Jean-Pierre says, oh, there's no indication it's aliens, I tend to think that the chances are pretty good that it's aliens. Just given all the gaslighting that happens in the White House briefing room, gaslighting around COVID and all that, I think it's probably aliens. And honestly, given how divided we are, maybe aliens is exactly what we need to bring us together, a common enemy or a common friend, or just something bigger than us where we can get out of our petty disagreements and our Twitter bubbles and our Facebook bubbles and worry about aliens and other life coming to the Earth, coming to Earth. So we'll see. But I just think this whole thing is so interesting. I mean, it is really fascinating. I think it has everybody's interest peak because it's oh, we don't know what these things are and we're just shooting them down, which is a little absurd. So the government, I think, is just blatantly hiding stuff from us, and maybe that's for good reason. But it also leaves the door open to aliens. And when, again, you doth protest too much, if Karine Jean-Pierre says, that's not aliens, and then all the sheeple in the White House briefing room just snicker, at Korean Jean-Pierre, I would definitely not rule out aliens. The following segment is presented in partnership with Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. It is a critical week in the state legislature in Washington, and that is because some of these bills we've been talking about for months now, it is do or die. They need to either progress before Friday or they're going to be dead. There are ways that lawmakers can try to revive certain things, but it's really not something that we can count on or trust that it's going to happen. And so if there is a bill that we've discussed that you're really passionate about, this is the week to continue to email elected leaders in your district and frankly, any elected leaders who are responsible for the bill or holding the bill up to really let them know your opinion on this issue. And I just want to take today to go through a couple of these things that are still pending and really stress the importance of getting this work done. And for the bills that I'm going to discuss right now, I think the really frustrating part for me is that they're bipartisan. All of the bills I'm about to discuss are bipartisan. And so I just don't, there is no common sense reason for them not to continue forth to a vote. And it's frustrating in some situations in particular to see just this small faction, a progressive faction of the Democratic Party in Olympia exert so much power over the rest of their caucus. The pursuit bill is a perfect example of this. I was so excited at the beginning of the session to see this bipartisan effort from Democrats and Republicans to fix the state's broken police pursuit policy, to see what's happening on our streets and on our highways and realize, hey, this isn't normal. Thousands of people are fleeing from law enforcement and going on to do who knows what. And we need to do something to address this issue. And so I was so optimistic when Senate Bill 5352 and House Bill 1363 were put forth. And I thought, great, bipartisan bills, there's no way these aren't going to advance. And then you had, again, just a handful of Democrats in the Washington State Senate, namely State Senator Manka Dhingra, who chairs Law and Justice, who I don't know if it's pride, I don't know if it's stubbornness, I don't know if it's just a lack of, they're not in touch with reality, have just ground these efforts to a halt. And the really frustrating thing is this. There are enough votes to pass the fix. There are enough votes today amongst Republicans and Democrats to pass this fix, which would put power back in the hands of law enforcement to be able to use their judgment and their training in deciding, is this pursuit in the best interest of public safety? There's enough support for it. There's apparently, though, not enough political will for it. And it's deeply disappointing, I think, and kind of shameful, frankly. I don't want to be mean, but it's kind of shameful for these progressives who are holding this thing up. And then for the other Democrats who support the policy but aren't willing to work with Republicans to bring it to the floor. And again, it's just an example of politics at its worst. They're beholden so much to their political party that they're not willing to push what they know is good policy, what they know will help public safety for the benefit of the people they serve. It's really, really disappointing. So again, I would just encourage you, I don't know if State Senator Manka Dhingra is a lost cause at this point, but if you in particular are represented by a Democrat in the state Senate in Washington, and you can find that out at future42.org. They have a really handy district finder. If you could just look that up and send some additional emails this week, just urging them to go with their conscience and common sense and push their own party to pass these bills. Senate Bill 5352, House Bill 1363. And look, I'm open to, I'd support a compromise on this. There are some of these progressive Democrats who want to study the issue. They want to put together a 19-person panel. They want to study it till their heart's content. Fine. But put the fix in place to just give a pause to this disorder on our streets and then study it. Because you know that if it needed to be studied, it should have been studied before you passed the woefully misguided change to the law in 2021. You know that. You should have studied it beforehand. So fine, study it now. But I think we should put the law back closer to how it was while you take whatever time you need to study the issue. Another bill I want to talk about that I'm a little more hopeful for, it is the effort going on, again, bipartisan basis, to fix the Blake decision, which, as you know, I know you're very well versed in this issue already, given how much we've talked about it. The Blake decision was a decision from the Washington State Supreme Court that found that our felony drug possession statute, as it was written, was unconstitutional. And so it nullified it. And if lawmakers don't do something to fix this issue, then come this summer, drug possession will just be legal in Washington state. So they need to do something. And again, there are bipartisan bills out there to fix it. The best bill, in my opinion, the most common sense bill, is Senate Bill 5467. Again, it has bipartisan support, and it achieves what we all want, which is for people to get better. No one wants, Democrats, Republicans, no one wants someone who's dealing with substance abuse disorder, and that's what it is, to just go to prison and lock them up and throw away the key. Nobody wants that. Nobody's asking for that. But there does have to be some teeth on the law so that law enforcement has the ability to see someone who's in the throes of addiction, one hot shot from killing themselves, and they can say either you get treatment or you're going to jail. And that's what Senate Bill 5467 accomplishes in a very reasonable, thoughtful, caring, compassionate way. It gives this individual multiple opportunities. It steers them toward treatment at every step in the process. But if they continuously fail to get treatment, then yeah, they do have to spend some time in jail. And to me, that is the best solution for all sides. It's common sense. Again, it has bipartisan support. So there are multiple bills out there to fix the Blake decision, but some of them are way too weak. This bipartisan bill is the best one, and it is the one that lawmakers should be prioritizing if we have any hope of getting this drug crisis under control. One more public safety bill that I want to touch on here, and I'll also get into it a little more in depth in a coming segment. There has been this issue that arose a little late this legislative session, but it's very important. There are fights going on in two communities in Washington state, one in Tenino and one in Enumclaw, where these sexually violent predators are being taken off McNeil Island, where they're currently being housed, and they're being placed in less secure facilities in communities across the state. And this is happening elsewhere as well, but Tenino and Enumclaw are the communities that have really started to advocate on behalf of themselves, on behalf of their families, and saying, hey, we want more of a say in this, or this is not the kind of person who we want in our communities, a few yards from a school bus stop. And so some lawmakers, and again, bipartisan, we're not talking about hyper-partisan public safety bills. We're talking about bipartisan public safety bills that are just lacking a little support from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party that is holding up these common sense steps. So lawmakers have taken note of the fight in Tenino to keep these sexually violent predators from moving into their community, the fight in Enumclaw to keep these sexually violent predators from continuing to move into their community. There's already one there. And so there are these two bipartisan proposals, House Bill 1813, House Bill 1813, and House Bill 1734. House Bill 1734. These bills would do two things. They would put an immediate halt on moving these convicted sex offenders out of McNeil Island into these facilities in our communities. And that halt would give the government time to reassess this issue. And I think that's important in this instance because I think this was done without a lot of thought. And then the second thing these bills would do is it would give communities more of a notice before one of these facilities starts accepting sex offenders into these neighborhoods. And that's important. We need to make sure that parents, families, businesses, schools, all the stakeholders know what's going on. There's an opportunity for them to have input in this situation and to prepare themselves for the possibility that they might have violent predators living in their communities. Again, very common sense stuff. Bipartisan bills. And so I'll again just urge you, if you haven't emailed your elected leaders or even called, sometimes phone calls, just be kind, but sometimes phone calls get more of a response than emails. I think emails can be a little easy to ignore. But yeah, I'd keep this in mind for any of you. It doesn't matter what your politics are. Democrat, Republican, Independent. These are bills that have the support, I think, to pass. But there is apparently a shortage of political will from the majority party to prioritize them. And I'll let you be the judge of why that is. Is it they're stubborn? Is it in the case of pursuits that you have lawmakers who don't want to admit that they were wrong, who are worried about what the far left fringe of the party, the police abolitionist types might say? I don't know what it is, but in truth, the majority of people want these bills passed. The majority of lawmakers in Olympia want these bills passed. They're bipartisan in nature for a reason. I've always said I think bipartisan bills tend to be the best policy because you have people who have starkly different views on issues who are able to come together and agree on something. So on these points, again, the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking for Democratic lawmakers who have so far not prioritized these issues to say, look, we have to move these bills forward before Friday. Because I really don't want to see what's going to happen in our communities if they don't take action to recriminalize drug possession, if they don't take action to allow police to engage in at least some vehicular pursuits in severe cases, if they don't take action to keep these violent, in some cases, repeat sex offenders out of our neighborhoods. I don't want to see what the next year is going to be like in Washington State. So I really, really hope that it doesn't come to that. The previous segment was brought to you in partnership with Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. Last week on the show, I played you some clips from a community meeting in Enumclaw, Washington, where parents, community members gathered to ask law enforcement, the state of Washington, Department of Corrections, questions about the placement of violent sex offenders in their neighborhood, specifically very close to a school bus stop. And this is part of the ramifications of a bill passed by the legislature in 2021 that said, hey, we want to try to transition these sex offenders back into society a little more seamlessly so they don't go from, strict confinement to no confinement. They wanted it to be like, okay, then there's going to be a stop in the community where there is a less restrictive, less secure facility where they're going to be housed at. And these things are popping up all across the state of Washington. So although we've been talking about two communities in particular, Enumclaw and Tenino, those are just the communities where parents are like, oh, hell no, and have stood up and spoke up for themselves. But I played you this clip from this community meeting in Enumclaw where parents were livid. And there were some really, really heated moments during that meeting where parents felt like they just were not being heard.
Now, I want to address the school bus stop. I don't have a dog in this fight. I want the victim's voice to always be heard in whatever scenario I find myself. And Chris Knutson was kind enough. We have done this before in the past. Now, the school bus stops, the windows, and I'm going to simplify this, and y'all might just say, the onus of keeping your kids safe is on you. You need to talk to your kids. You need to open a dialogue with your children. Keep them safe at the bus stop. What can you do? Stand up, stand up. Stand up, the two ladies with the bus stop. No, what I'm telling you. What I'm telling you is talk to your kids before they're getting to the bus stop. I can't hear you.
So the woman in that clip is a victim's advocate who works for a independent nonprofit in King County, but that gets funding from King County and the state of Washington. And I had so many of you comment on that clip when we first played it last week saying, trying to keep their kids safe is exactly what those parents were doing in Enumclaw by being at that community meeting, trying to keep violent sex offenders out of their neighborhood, away from their kids, trying to keep their kids safe, advocating for the safety of their kids is exactly what they were trying to do. What they can't control is what the state of Washington decides to do, is whether the state of Washington decides to drop a sex offender in their neighborhood, and then they have to deal with the ramifications. So it was incredibly tone deaf for that woman to suggest that the onus is entirely on parents. Just talk to your kids. Just talk to your kids, and that will stop a predator from taking advantage of a split second in time and hurting them and harming them. It's unreal to me. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about this today because what's really important to understand is, like I said, this is happening in communities across Washington, in all corners of the state. And so whether you know about these facilities or not, there is a chance that there's already one in your community. And I also wanted to just talk a little further about this concept. You know, when we talk about, I think Democrats in Washington state have really, and I'm okay with trying to reduce recidivism. I'm okay, obviously, I'm okay with, making steps to try to make sure that when somebody gets out of prison, they're not going to reoffend. And I think with sex offenders in particular, you have to, every effort you can possibly make to make sure that they can get out of lockup, get out of wherever they're being housed, off McNeil Island, and not hurt anyone again. So I understand that. But when this law was passed in 2021 that said, hey, we need to, basically do this more often, get people off McNeil Island and into these less secure facilities, it was stated specifically in the law that you would only do so if the community could be protected. And if it was in the best interest, of the offender, and if the community could be protected. And I would argue that already they're not following that. Because specifically, the parents in Enumclaw were mad about a man named Stephen Knapp being placed at this facility near a school bus stop. And they'd done their own bird dogging on this, their own watchdogging on this, found out a ton of things about Stephen Knapp. But I want to read for you, and it's going to be hard to listen to. I just want to say that. I mean, if you have kids, this might be very graphic and hard to listen to, but I want you to understand the type of person that the state of Washington thinks is suitable to be put into these less secure facilities. I want you to really understand the type of person who they are prioritizing moving off McNeil Island into your neighborhood. And, again, the vast majority of people who get incarcerated in Washington state are going to get out someday. That's just the reality of our American judicial system. There are very few crimes where you're going to go to prison for life and never get back out. So it's just you might think sex offenders should go to prison for the rest of their lives or be put to death, and that might be your opinion. And I think there might be some arguments in certain cases that would be a very, very legitimate opinion to have, but that's not the reality of our current criminal justice system. So, there are going to be sex offenders who leave McNeil Island and end up in our communities. But people like Stephen Knapp should not be among them. Again, this is going to be hard for me to read. It's going to probably be hard for you to listen to, but I want there to be a wake-up call for politicians who think that this is okay, who would be okay with someone like Stephen Knapp living near their kid's bus stop, because I imagine that they wouldn't be okay with it. So Stephen Knapp has a history of sexual violence dating back to the 1970s, to when he was a minor. And in these court documents, we learn a lot about his life. I mean, it's very clear that he has some mental shortcomings, some learning disabilities. Like, he doesn't operate at his age level. I think that is fair to say. But because of that, in part because of that, he has these predatory tendencies that simply are reoccurring, that he has never been able to get away from. His interactions with law enforcement go back to January of 1977. So in January of 1977, he was 16 years old. He walked into Lake City Elementary School, told the secretary he'd been sent there by a mom to pick up her daughter and her son. They were both 7 years old. So he goes in there, says, hey, their mom sent me to pick them up. He's 16. These kids are 7. Thank God the secretary calls the mom. And the mom says, I didn't send anybody to pick up my kids. Knapp had apparently lived in the same apartment complex as these kids. The mom said that she had seen Knapp at this apartment complex exposing himself. And then she finds out that he had gone to her kids' school with this ruse trying to pick them up. And you just think about what he might have been planning with those kids. And that was his first interaction with law enforcement. A year later, August 1978, there was a report of 2 incidents involving Mr. Knapp. Again, he was 17 at the time. Both incidents involved him allegedly exposing himself to young girls and touching the vagina of a 5-year-old girl. The 5-year-old girl said, quote, Charles pulled down my pants and touched my wee-wee. He also pulled his pants down and touched me with his dick. That's a quote from the court documents. August 1979, he was convicted of lewd conduct in Seattle Municipal Court. Knapp exposed himself to 2 5-year-old girls. So we obviously have a pattern of behavior here. And again, this is going back decades. May 1983, a woman dropped her 3 children, 2 girls, 1 boy, ages 6, 5, and 2, at their babysitter's house. Steve Knapp was at this house. He was 23 at the time, spent the day at the house with the kids. At some point during the day, according to court documents, Knapp put the children in the bedroom for a nap. He remained in the room and instructed one of the kids, a 6-year-old girl, to remove her clothes. In the presence of her 5-year-old sister and 2-year-old brother, this is tough to read. Now imagine being one of those parents at Enumclaw, knowing who's next to your kid's bus stop. He made the 6-year-old girl rub Vaseline on his penis and attempted vaginal penile penetration. He was charged with rape in King County. I don't think I can read any more of those. Graphic. So, 1990, he was convicted of 1 count of child molestation. 1983, attempted statutory rape in the 1st degree. And on and on and on from there. Now, what I thought was really interesting is over the years, there have been several clinical psychologists who have evaluated Stephen Knapp to gauge his suitability for release into the community or his suitability into release into one of these less than secure facilities. And on multiple occasions, clinical psychologists essentially said he'll always be a violent sexual predator. He'll always be a sexual deviant. He will always have this urge to hurt young girls. This is a 1999 report from a clinical psychologist who wrote, there is a generalized concern for child molesters being in community settings where children congregate. This concern is heightened in Mr. Knapp's case due to his pattern of offending. In the past, this pattern included using his bike to cruise bike trails to view and contact children, and his involvement in this behavior in the past preceded by a short period of time since his last known sex offense. So he would get convicted of a sex offense, and then he'd just go out and prey on children. In fact, while on community placement, he was repeatedly polygraphed on the question of whether he had been hanging out where children are congregating, because they knew that this was his behavior. In fact, one time right after he had got out of serving time for a sex offense, he went to Bellevue Square Mall and was caught on surveillance video groping a 5-year-old girl. The clinical psychologist concluded that Mr. Knapp's mental abnormalities and personality disorder persist. He wrote, these current mental conditions predispose him to commit sexually violent acts against young girls and render him more likely than not to commit predatory acts of sexual violence if not confined in a secure facility. Treatment has not sufficiently impacted his risk of reoffense in a manner indicating he is less likely than not to reoffend. His recent overt acts, as described in this declaration, do not simply exceed the threshold of reasonable apprehension. Instead, I would characterize these acts as highly alarming, suggesting imminent risk of reoffense is extreme. And there are multiple examples in documents that show that even when in these community settings, where he should have never been sent in the first place, he would continue to engage in predatory behavior. So now we have this situation where Stephen Knapp is in a community setting in Enumclaw after already having shown that he's incapable of being in one of these settings. And he is in very close proximity to a school bus stop where kids congregate. Now, I want you to think about everything that I just told you, and I want you to listen again to what those parents in Enumclaw were told about their own responsibility to protect their kids.
The onus of keeping your kids safe is on you. You need to talk to your kids. You need to open a dialogue with your children. Keep them safe at the bus stop.
It's bullshit. It's disgusting. These parents should not have to be at that community meeting trying to make this case that that man is not safe to be in their neighborhood, is not safe to be so close to a school bus stop where their kids are going to be. And they sure as hell should not have to sit there and be told that it is their sole responsibility to protect their children when the state is forcing this man on their communities and they feel like they have no say in the matter. It's disgusting. Quite honestly, it's disgusting. So I want to go back and I want to point to two bills that, again, have bipartisan support. These are bipartisan bills that would allow for a pause in taking these sexual deviants off McNeil Island and putting them in a community near you. House Bill 1813, and I'm going to read the names, in fact, of the lawmakers who have signed on to that bill. And thank you to every single one of them. Representatives Griffey, Dolio, Robertson, Couture, Stokesbury, Voles, Chambers, Sandlin, Mossbrucker, Christian, Jacobson, McClintock, Graham, Connors, and Barkis. House Bill 1813 would put a pause on moving these sex offenders off McNeil Island into these facilities until more work can be done on this issue. And then there's House Bill 1734. I'm going to read the sponsors of this bill. Thank you to every single one of you. Representatives Couture, Chapman, Griffey, Robertson, Walsh, Sandlin, Orcutt, Abarno, McIntyre, Maycumber, Stokesbury, and Graham. This bill would make sure that adequate notice is given to community members in a place where these violent sex offenders might be moved. And the fact that adequate notice isn't being given already is absolutely unacceptable. So for those of you who have been following the fight in Tenino and Enumclaw against what's happening in their communities, know that it is not isolated to those communities. Those are simply the first communities where people have said enough is enough. We're not going to sit back and watch this and watch this happen. The first communities where people have found out about what's going on. So on the long list of bills that need to see progress before the Friday cutoff, absolutely these are two of them, House Bill 1813, House Bill 1734. So there are a lot of West Coast cities dealing with a homelessness crisis, which again, I don't think is actual crisis of people not having homes. I think it's a crisis that is spurred by drug use and mental illness. And as a result, people can't keep a job where they can afford a home, where they can't keep a home, etc. And so I've said that I think it's really dangerous for politicians to continue to push the narrative that it's a housing crisis. Do I think we need more housing? Of course. I mean, if we can get these people off drugs, if we can get them help for their mental illness, they are eventually going to need someplace to live. But it's putting the cart before the horse to say, put them in housing. They'll die in the housing. Or they'll use drugs in the housing and get kicked out. An example of which I'm going to give you momentarily. And, this is something Governor Jay Inslee, he gave his State of the State address, and he wants voters to approve $4 billion in funding for housing, most of it to go to housing over the next 6 years. And as I told the governor in an interview after his State of the State, it terrifies me. He thinks it's a housing issue. And until he's willing to admit it's not, I'll never vote for that thing, and I'll encourage anyone who'll listen not to vote for his $4 billion plan. And there were two examples of stories this past week that really highlighted exactly what we've been saying about this. There was an encampment fire down in the Chinatown International District in Seattle. And firefighters arrive first, and then police officers get there, and firefighters are like, hey, you might want to look over here. We see a bunch of burnt money and some safes. So police go look, they do a search of this encampment and what's left, and they find guns, bundles of cash, and narcotics, like $7,000 cash, a ton of drugs, which enough where it's actually, clear that this is someone selling drugs. And, there's some BB guns that were made to look like real guns, a couple revolvers, etc. But this is the point. And this is actually, if you recall, we had on Andrea Suarez with We Heart Seattle. She basically started this organization because she was fed up as a citizen of watching, all the garbage and what was happening with the homeless encampments. And so it started with them just cleaning up encampments. And something she started to notice very quickly is that you'd have this homeless encampment, and there'd be a bunch of tents, but the number of people living there was always less than the number of tents. And what they came to realize is that some of the tents were there strictly for criminal activity. It would be like the drug dealer's tent. And in Seattle, they're not going to sweep the tent, and if they do, they'll give you 72 hours notice. And so if you're a drug dealer, that's perfect. Why would you not set up shop where all the drug users are? Again, because this is a drug crisis, right? And so you have, again, SPD pull all these money and guns and drugs out of this homeless encampment. It's not a housing issue. It's a drug issue. And then there was a second story from Jonathan Cho where there was a Seattle hotel, it's called the Nexus Hotel, where there was a bunch of homeless people living. And of course, there's been this big effort to buy out these hotels and put homeless people in them because they say it's just a housing issue. Oh, if we just give them shelter, roof over their head, no problem. That's the whole issue. They just can't afford a place to live. Well, as Jonathan Cho points out, nearly 40 homeless people were kicked out of this homeless hotel in Seattle for alleged violations such as drug use in rooms and assault on staff. And they've now been moved to Renton and Federal Way motels. Getting a roof over their head didn't do anything. Why? Because it's not a housing issue. It's not a shelter issue. It is a substance abuse issue, and it is a mental health issue. It is a crime issue. So again, you look at these, I don't know how anyone can deny this. You clearly have homeless camps that are being used as a front for criminal activity in some instances. And you have people who, even when given shelter, they're not ceasing. They don't just go in there and they're like, wow, I have this roof over my head and I never have to do drugs again. It's foolish. If Governor Inslee wants to take his $4 billion plan and flip it upside down and give the bulk of it to enforcing drug laws, enforcing laws on the books around shoplifting, other quality of life issues, and then wants to give some of it for shelter and supportive housing, where people are mandated, if they are in that housing, to be getting treatment, we can have a conversation about it. I might be willing to support something like that. After all, we're in so deep, we got to do something. It's going to cost money to get out of it. But I pray to God, the voters, do not give that man who's been in office for 11 years another $4 billion to piss away while not a thing gets better on our streets. I pray to God that voters are not that naive. Continuing on my Eastside weight loss clinic journey, you guys have been messaging me saying, hey, I heard about Eastside weight loss clinic plan on the podcast and now I'm on it. Somebody told me they're down 11 pounds. We're kind of commiserating together about ups and downs of, being on any sort of weight loss journey. And the thing is, I'm down, almost like 30 pounds, I'm down 30 pounds because I'm trying to do the math of my last time I weighed myself. About 30 pounds, which is crazy. I've got 9 pounds or so, 10 pounds left to go where I'll be comfortable back to my pre-COVID weight, feeling good about myself. And the thing is that I regret not having done it sooner because I was hearing commercials on the radio for the Eastside Weight Loss Clinic plan for months and months and months. And then I finally got big enough where I'm like, okay, I'll just do it. And I wish I had done it sooner because I lost weight so freaking quickly. And I'm going on vacation in March. I'm losing weight in time for the summer and bikini season. It's great. So if you think that a weight loss plan where you have some structure is good for you, where you have accountability, if you want a plan where you don't have to go into an office and be weighed all the time, there's a great app that the Eastside Weight Loss Clinic plan comes with. And if you are just carrying some extra weight around from the pandemic like me, I think this is a really, really great plan for you. There's no prepackaged meals. You get to go grocery shopping. You can usually find something at restaurants that you're able to eat on the plan. I just ate out a little bit this weekend, feeling fine about it, no serious guilt. Give the Eastside Weight Loss Clinic plan a chance. And if you're not sure, just set up a free consultation with Dr. Coogan and just ask some questions about it. And he'll let you know. He'll be honest if it's right for you or if it's not. So go to eastsideweightlossclinic.com, eastsideweightlossclinic.com, and schedule your free consultation. But don't wait like I did. Don't wait several months and gain more weight and then finally give in and do it. Just do it now. Get back on track. Dr. Ryan Coogan, D.C., results may vary. Okay, I want to end with some comments from you guys about the clip I played earlier with the woman at the Enum Claw meeting, where she's saying the onus is on you to protect your kids from these sex offenders. Because, as someone who wants the government to just stay out of my life, I do agree that parents are responsible for protecting their kids. And most parents know that. And most parents take that job and that responsibility very seriously. But when there are outside factors out of your control, you're going to need a little help on that one. And when the government's forcing these sexually violent predators in your community, showing up and speaking out about that is the height of trying to look out for the safety of your kids. So it's just ridiculous. Christina wrote that victim's advocate is exactly right. The onus is on the parents to protect their children, which is why they were at that meeting, loudly opposing the placement of sex offenders in their community. TC said, I feel like I'm struggling to understand. On the one hand, the onus is on us parents to protect our children. At the same time, they are proposing a law to allow lifelong medical decisions to be made by children as young as 13, which is it? And that's so true. They are in Washington State. Okay, there's several things here that don't make sense. The logic doesn't make sense. As an example, they are currently pushing laws to take it easier on juvenile offenders, saying they lack the mental capacity to understand their decisions. Yet you let them make life-altering medical decisions starting at the age of 13 without parental consent? Which is it? Are they mature enough to make medical decisions or not? Are they mature enough to deal with the consequences of their actions or not? You cannot have it both ways. That doesn't make any sense at all. That's such a good point. Mike said, saying the onus is on parents to protect their kids while simultaneously trying to put a sex offender house next to a school bus stop is like saying it's on you to look both ways before crossing the street while blowing through a busy crosswalk at 100 miles per hour while drunk. Very true. Yes, there's truth to the statement, but you're using it to absolve yourself of responsibility for your own reckless actions. It's like saying, it's not my fault you don't watch what your kids eat while I try to feed them 2 pounds of sugar the moment your back is turned. That is absolutely spot on. All right, that's it for today's episode of Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to our mission, to giving common sense a comeback. Please reach out on some of these bills if you haven't already. If you go to the Sunday newsletter on Patreon or Locals, I have links to all those bills in there. And at the top of the bill, you'll see the names of all the sponsors. But also, if you want to find out who your legislators are, you can go to future42.org. They have a handy little district finder, and that can help you email your lawmakers just to reiterate what your priorities are as a citizen and what you would like to see them prioritize this week before the Friday cutoff. If you have not become an Undivided subscriber already, please do so. We're working to grow. We had huge growth last year, went from 1 half-hour show to 3 one-hour shows. We're trying to grow again. Could really use the financial support to be able to do that. So patreon.com/undivided, or you can become a contributor on my Locals community, Brandi, Kruse.locals.com. unDivided.com. For subscribers, I will see you on the Wednesday subscriber-only show.